Well, welcome to our second ever episode of Thinking Through Theologically. Thank you to all of you who commented back. I know some of you sent some questions. I was not able to answer all of them, but I just really appreciate all of the feedback that you've given. And it sounds like the interest level is high enough for me to maybe continue to do this. I'm kind of excited about it. And so just before we dig in, just to let you know, I'm also posting these on my YouTube channel, and I'll be putting that link up as well. So that if you want to like and follow there, you can do that as well. This is still on Facebook as well for the time being, while I'm figuring all of this stuff out. So welcome to the journey. And again, continue to comment or like or, just welcome your feedback. And thank you for getting on this train with me. So last time we talked about descriptive, prescriptive, and restrictive theology. Today I'm going to use another three-word phrase, and we're going to talk about practices, patterns, and principles in Scripture and in theology. And really what we want to learn a little bit about doing is about drawing principles out from Scripture, things that we can draw on and apply in our own lives. And so I'll start, perhaps with a few quick definitions. A practice is the customary or expected procedure or way of doing something. These are all Oxford English Dictionary definitions. A pattern is a regular form or sequence discernible in the way in which something happens or is done. So it's something repetitive. A principle is a fundamental truth or proposition serving as the foundation of or for a belief or action. So the principle is the thing that is built on, and patterns and practices come out of principles and not the other way around. However, we can extract a principle out of patterns and out of practices by just doing a little bit of digging. So I want to give you a few biblical examples of some of these. I'll give you an example of a practice in the Bible where we need to draw a principle out of. 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12 tells us, greet one another with a holy kiss. And that actually command in the New Testament is given 5 times. 5 times the New Testament tells us to greet one another with a holy kiss. Now, my question would be, does that mean that if we don't kiss each other every time we greet each other, that we're disobeying the Bible? Does this mean that we're disobeying God? If I bump into you at Walmart and I don't kiss you on the cheek, or if I don't see you at church and I don't kiss you on the cheek, does that mean that I'm disobeying Scripture? Because it's very clear that this was a commanded practice in the New Testament. But the point is that we need to understand the principle that is behind that practice. And the principles that are underlying are the encouragement to connect with each other, to, engage in relationship with each other, to not be aloof and not be, inhospitable to each other. It's this issue of connection and relationship. That's the principle behind it. But in order to extract that principle, if you're studying the Bible, then you need to understand culture, you need to understand context, and you need to understand language. And these are 3 major players in what's called exegesis. We're going to talk about that in another episode. But we need to understand culture. How did they do things in that day? We need to understand context. What was the context of the statement that was being made, the context of the writing of the book, so on and so forth. And the language, what's it really saying in the Greek, and how is it really fitting in the broader context of language as well? So that's one example. We don't practice, perhaps in other countries and in other cultures they do, but what we do here, outside of the COVID world, is we greet one another with a good handshake, or with a hug, or a side hug, or a high five, or whatever that might be. But those are different practices that are still connected to the same principle, okay? Then we can also look at patterns. And patterns, for example, an interesting pattern, and this becomes a topic perhaps of contention for some people, but tithing is an interesting thing, because tithing in the Bible was not just prescribed under the law of Moses. Some people say, well, tithing is just an Old Testament thing that was commanded in the law. But tithing is something that is patterned throughout the Bible. And it goes back to Genesis before the law was even given. So in Genesis 14:20, for example, the Melchizedek is giving a prayer and a praise, and he says, "Praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hands," speaking to Abraham. And then it says, then Abram, before his name was changed, Abram gave him a tenth of everything. And the Bible talks about Melchizedek being, a priest at that time. And then we're going to look, in Hebrews 7, it refers to Jesus as a link, a pattern, and being our high priest. In Genesis 28, Jacob gave God a tenth of everything. Even in Genesis 4, going further back, it doesn't say a tenth per se, but it says that even Cain and Abel were giving to God out of their increase, from their animals and from their what grew. And if you want a reference for a little bit of a study tying it to the New Testament, you could jot down Hebrews 6 verses 20 to chapter 7 verse 10. And it talks about how that Jesus is our high priest in the order of Melchizedek, and how that the tenth that was given in the past, we still give, but we give it to Jesus as our high priest. So the principle is this, is that giving to God is a function of your relationship and an expression of your relationship with God. And that's a pattern throughout Scripture, not just a particular practice from the law of Moses. And so when you come to the New Testament, you find that, there are lots of principles, and some of them remain plain. Like Jesus oftentimes took Old Testament practices and patterns and just explained the principles. So he says, it was written, don't commit adultery. That's a practice. But he says, but I say to you, if you look on a woman to lust after her in your heart, you've already committed adultery in your heart. So he was drawing out that the point was not just the act, but that the principle is about the loyalty of a person's heart to their spouse, and that there's a disloyalty even in lusting, okay? Then there are practices that the Bible does give us to repeat, like Jesus, when at the Last Supper, said, do this in remembrance of me. So we continue to practice communion, but we do it understanding that communion is more than just a practice. It's also a principle, and it speaks of the sacrifice of Jesus and the covenant that we have with him and the forgiveness that we receive from him. So I just, maybe this will equip you a little bit, but when you're reading the Bible, when you're studying the Scripture, when you're seeing certain practices, ask yourself if there's a pattern. Look through other parts of Scripture. Is there a pattern? If you discover a pattern, then begin to dig deeper and ask and study and search out, is there a principle that underlies that pattern? Because the principle is the thing that we can draw out and make application in our present day lives. And so I don't have to kiss my brother to still be fulfilling the principle of connecting with one another. We want to draw those principles out, and then we want to practice the practices that should be carried on, but live out the principles that are true for all time. Hope that you enjoyed that. Again, I welcome your comments or any feedback that you have to provide. God bless you. Have yourself a really great day.